A House committee releasing 6 years of Donald Trump's tax returns today after the Supreme Court ruled Congress has a right to the taxes as part of its oversight duties. So the committee spent years fighting to get these documents, you might remember, which really there's a lot of pushback from the former president. His taxes also a hot topic in some of the past presidential debates.
I paid millions of dollars in taxes, millions of dollars of income tax. And let me just tell you, there was a story in one of the papers. I paid $38 million one year. I paid $27 million.
Show us your tax returns.
I went, you'll see it as soon as it's finished. You'll see it.
I want to bring in CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Roiphe to break down what we can expect and really the legal implications. Rebecca, what are we going to learn with these returns?
Well, one of the things that we've already learned from the summary of these returns is that the former president reported some income in the years 2018 and 2019, and he did pay about $1 million in taxes. And then the following year in 2020, he reported losses such that he would pay no income taxes, which was his general practice prior to becoming president. So one of the things I think people are looking for is what happened in that year, and what was his income, and then where did it fall off? Another thing that I think people are looking at is what were the sources of his income during the presidency, because there were all of these questions and they were really speculation about what his ties were to foreign power. And so one of the key insights that his taxes will give us is, was he receiving any income from foreign entities or individuals, how much and when? So I think that's another thing that we're looking for. And then finally, there's always this overlying question about potential fraud. He's being investigated, as we know, by the New York State Attorney General in this $250 million lawsuit about all of this fraud. And there are questions about whether or not, some of the losses that he declared were fraudulent or whether they were real losses.
And Rebecca, a congressional nonpartisan joint committee on taxation had already raised multiple red flags about aspects of those taxes. So what can you tell us about that specifically?
Right. So one of the things, I don't know if I would call it a red flag, or what's called those carryover losses. So essentially what real estate allows you to do is shelter some of your income. So to declare essentially that your real estate has depreciated, has lost value over time, and that loss can offset certain gains the following years. And so that enables people like Donald Trump, who make a lot of their money through real estate, to essentially pay no taxes. Now, that may be troubling to lots of people, but that is the law. However, the question is, in the scope of his declared losses, is there anything fraudulent? So are there any losses that he's declaring that are not in fact losses, or ways in which he's manipulating these numbers such that it is illegal? And the second thing we want to look for is, I think, his charitable donations, because there are a lot of red flags about cash donations to charities. And specifically, he uses some of his land to as declared charity when he can no longer develop it. So the question is whether that is legal or not legal. And then there is finally questions about loans to his children and potentially certain payments that he has made to his children that he has sheltered from taxes, and whether or not that's allowed or could potentially expose him to criminal liability as well.
And in the report last week, the Ways and Means Committee indicated that the Trump administration may have disregarded something called a post-Watergate requirement that maybe we're not so familiar with, but you probably are. Make us smart on that.
Right. So this is not a law. This is a practice or a regulation within the Internal Revenue Service that they have implemented, and it is mandatory. So even though it's not congressional and it's not legislative, it's still a mandatory policy that they audit presidents each year and vice presidents. And the law has been this particular regulation has been followed by the IRS with regard to other presidents and vice presidents. I think there's been reporting that President Obama was audited, as was and is Joe Biden. So what happened there? Why did the IRS declined to follow this policy for 2 years until, and the timing I think is interesting, until there was an inquiry that was made by Congress about Trump's taxes. At that point, the IRS started to abide by its own policy. And why? So there are huge question marks there, and I think we're waiting to find some answers about that.
Well, Rebecca Roiphe, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be speaking to you later on today.
Thank you.